Episode 16, a discussion with Ari Paul. Ari Paul has his MBA from the University of Chicago and is a CFA charter holder. He just left his position as a portfolio manager for University of Chicago's endowment to open up a cryptocurrency hedge fund. So we're going to discuss cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin here. I hope you enjoy the discussion. At one point, I say that it is not allowed for me to collect payment in gold, and that is not correct. So when you hear me say that, I said I'd Google it to find out, and I had the information wrong. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the discussion. I'm here talking with Ari Paul today, and we're going to talk about cryptocurrency, because I don't know much about it, and he's a good person to talk to. Ari, why are you a good person to talk to about this?
Hi, Jay. Well, for 4 or 5 years, I was a derivatives trader, kind of the typical Wall Street trader, commodities, bonds, treasuries. Then I spent 4 years working as a portfolio manager for an endowment for the University of Chicago. So I have kind of the traditional financial background, trading, portfolio management, risk management. And then 2 years ago, I started investing in cryptocurrency and got increasingly interested, kind of fell down the rabbit hole. And I just left my job at the University of Chicago, and I'm launching a cryptocurrency hedge fund. So I'm one of the earlier people with a traditional financial background, kind of Wall Street background, moving into the space.
Great. I don't know much about cryptocurrency, but like everyone else, I feel like I missed a big opportunity with Bitcoin when I was talking about it a few years ago. Didn't pull the trigger because I didn't understand what it was and didn't really know what to think about it, and now it's blown up, of course. So I'm going to throw at you the hardest question I can think of off the bat, and that is, can you explain to me cryptocurrency like I'm in 5th grade?
It's really tough, and there's no single simple answer. The challenge here is that cryptocurrency is kind of a combination of a whole bunch of different things. So I actually like to start with the use cases, with why it's meaningful, and then we can kind of later on dissect how it provides that value. So first, why is Bitcoin valuable? Why should this kind of fake zeros and ones electronic currency have any value at all? And the straightforward answer to that is it's the first asset in human history that can't be seized, can't be taken by a corrupt judge, can't be taken by an oppressive regime. And the reason for that is the money is secured basically by a password. So I can cross a border. I can go from South Korea, fly to the US with $1 million only in my head. So let me tell you exactly how that would work. To own Bitcoin means you own what's called a private key. It means you own a piece of information.
Let me stop you just real quick.
Yeah.
Is this applicable to most cryptocurrency or all cryptocurrency? We're just saying Bitcoin. Okay. Bitcoin's the famous one, so that's one we'll talk about.
Sure. And we can definitely touch on others. But yeah, almost all cryptocurrency, the basics that we're going to be talking about applies to all of them. So to own cryptocurrency means you know a private key, which you can think of like a password. I can store that password. I can encrypt it with another password and email it to myself. So what I have is kind of an encrypted piece of information that I email on every cloud service. I email it to Yahoo and Google and Microsoft. And it's a piece of information encrypted with a password that's only in my head. So I can get on a plane, fly from Korea to the US to China to Russia, and then when I land, I have that $1 million available. There's no way for a government they can seize my luggage, they can take every article of clothing from me. I don't need to carry a USB stick. Just this password in my head means I can move money.
And I don't know if now's the right time to get into it, but is Bitcoin usable for money at this time? Or cryptocurrency?
What can you do with it? It's not what you're asking, right? Like, is it money?
Well, so I'm asking, if you go to Russia tomorrow and you have all your money in Bitcoin, are you actually going to be able to spend it or trade it in for rubles or whatever? Is that something that's possible right now?
Yeah, so you have a few choices. There are Bitcoin ATMs all over the world. You can convert to cash. In Chicago alone, I think there's something like 20 Bitcoin ATMs. More realistically, I think there are Bitcoin ATMs in Russia, but there are exchanges all over the world, including in Russia, where you can convert huge amounts of money. So there's something like $500 million a day in Bitcoin volume. If you had $50 million in Bitcoin, you could convert it into rubles or US dollars or yuan in that same day.
Just through a website. You don't need a currency exchange or something.
Right. It would be through a website, through an exchange. There is a tricky part to that. So if I want to get US dollars, I somehow need a bank account. I need some way of converting, right? So but these websites, these exchanges, they connect your bank account. If you don't want to connect to a bank account, there are other websites that let you meet up with someone in an alley where they'll give you cash and you'll transfer them Bitcoin. Yeah. That's a little dangerous, a little shady.
Right.
There are also tons of vendors who take it. So, for example, Overstock.com accepts Bitcoin.
Right.
Dell accepts Bitcoin. Expedia accepts Bitcoin.
I accepted my very first payment in Bitcoin last month, which so now I'm the proud owner of 1 month of jiu-jitsu tuition in Bitcoin. And I have an app, Bread Wallet is how I collected it, and the guy just sent it over. And now I guess I just hold on to it indefinitely. Do you accumulate Bitcoins? Is that what you're doing, or accumulating cryptocurrencies and just holding on to it?
So as an individual investor, I'm accumulating. I think Bitcoin has a good chance of continuing to appreciate in value for a very long time. As a fund manager, we're going to be much more actively trading. We're going to be going in and out. We're going to be making, much shorter term trades. But for most people, I would highly recommend just buying and holding.
Like I was just looking at my portfolio today for this conversation. I have something like 2% in precious metals. Mm-hmm. You're thinking something similar for cryptocurrencies or for Bitcoin, some 2 to 5 to 20% depending on your risk or whatever.
Pretty much. The sizing question is really tough. So the problem is you have this thing that is basically every year for 8 years has done phenomenally well. I say every year. It had 1 year that was down during that period, and it's hyper volatile, right? So it absolutely could have a year where it's down 70%. But you have this asset that has been appreciating really fast, that has no correlation to anything else. It's not correlated to stocks or bonds. So if you ask an MBA student what percentage of my portfolio should be in it, and they do any kind of the traditional economics, the answer is a massive amount. Like 50% of your portfolio should be in this. The problem is we don't know that that's going to keep doing that going forward.
Why would such a high number be what they come back with?
So kind of the basic idea of portfolio construction is the two numbers that matter to you. You don't care about how volatile an asset is if it's one small piece of your portfolio.
Right.
You care about what's the return and what's the correlation to the rest of your portfolio.
Right.
So most stocks are correlated to one another. So if you own Microsoft and you add Amazon, you're not reducing your risk that much. You're not getting that much of a diversification benefit.
Right.
Because cryptocurrency is so uncorrelated, you get a massive diversification benefit. So even though Bitcoin's really risky, if you take a portfolio of stocks and you add 10% Bitcoin to it, you actually have a less risky portfolio because you've diversified.
Yeah.
So there's no real answer to what
50% seems pretty high to me.
It does. So I don't recommend that anyone put 50%. My point is that traditional economic theory would give you an answer like that.
Okay.
My recommendation to people would be something like 10%.
Okay.
And that's kind of arbitrary. There's no way to mathematically arrive at a right number.
Right. And I talked to you on Facebook about this before. For me, a regular guy, to diversify into cryptocurrency, I would like to have access to an ETF, but that's not a thing right now. Like that's how I have my gold and silver is through ETFs, GOD and SLV. Do you see that on the horizon for crypto?
Yeah, my guess is it's about 12 months away. So there were 3 ETF proposals. The famous Winklevoss twins of Facebook fame, they had an ETF that they proposed, and the SEC shut them down.
Okay.
There are other ETF proposals in the works that are more likely to get passed. I actually just submitted a letter to the SEC basically asking them to approve a current ETF proposal. My guess is it's 12 months away. By the time the ETF launches, Bitcoin is likely to be much higher.
Okay.
So the effort that you have to expend today to take it, and it is a big effort. It's operationally complex. It's annoying to buy Bitcoin and to store it securely. I think you're getting well paid for that effort because there's a ton of people who are also waiting for the ETF.
Right. And for it to, like I've watched it go all the way up. I was first going to get in. I told myself when it gets under 500, and it got under 500. This was, I think, 2011 or something, and Coinbase was the big exchange, and it was having some problem where it couldn't pay out or something. Do you remember that happening? There was a brief period where there was some confusion in Coinbase, and it scared me off of buying it. It might have just been literally the week that I looked at it, but I know that I read that there was some things that showed me that it was a very market in its infancy, right? So
certainly true. So the big crisis for Bitcoin in late 2013, the biggest exchange was Mt. Gox. And Mt. Gox collapsed as an exchange. It turned out to be kind of a Ponzi scheme. People lost a ton of money.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
You might be thinking Mt. Gox. So in 2011, Bitcoin ranged from $1 to something like $35. In 2013, it rallied from about, I'm not sure exactly where it started, but about $100 up to $1,100, and then collapsed.
It must have been that, because when it collapsed is when I was eyeballing it.
Yeah, so. Collapsed all the way back to, I think it hit a low of something like $160 overnight in early 2014. The exchanges are absolutely risky. So in traditional markets, we usually don't worry about the exchange going under. Right. So if I buy stock, I'm not that worried that the CME or that the New York Stock Exchange is going to go under. In cryptocurrency, it's a real risk. Yeah. And so for me, I'll put money on an exchange, buy the cryptocurrency, and then take the cryptocurrency off as fast as I can. Okay. I don't want the cryptocurrency. If you have cryptocurrency on an exchange, what you have is an IOU from the exchange.
Got it.
If they go under, you lose your money.
So when you take it off the exchange, where do you put it?
So the term that is used is wallet, which is kind of a colloquial term. Basically what that means is a wallet in cryptocurrency is software that manages your private keys for you. So I said that owning Bitcoin means you know a private key, but it's really awkward to be writing that down or even encrypting it. Right. And you probably want to have, if you move Bitcoin around, you need a long list of these keys. So people have written software that does all of that for you very conveniently. So a simple solution is you can install a Bitcoin wallet like Electrum on a desktop. Electrum is an open source wallet that's popular. But even that, the problem is if someone hacks your desktop, they steal your money.
Right.
So the best solution for people who have a little bit more is something, is a hardware wallet, which is a special piece of hardware made to store cryptocurrency. One of them is called Trezor, Trezor. It costs $100. It takes a couple hours to figure out how to use.
Okay.
Which I totally
Forget
get.
It, not going to do it.
Yeah, totally get. It's annoying. It's a hassle. It's prohibitive for a lot of people to deal with this.
So I have Bread Wallet, which I guess is just an app that theoretically someone could hack into, but the odds are probably pretty slim, I would guess. Yeah,
so you're not a huge target. And if it's not, the way I think about this is similar to cash, right? So you have some cash in your back pocket. Literally in your wallet. You know it could fall out, it could fall in a sewer, someone could mug you, but it's a couple $100, you're willing to trade, you're taking the risk for the convenience, right? You're not going to have your life savings in your back pocket. So for a small amount of money, an app on your phone is fine. As it becomes a bigger and bigger amount, you want more and more security.
Right.
So the Trezor is the equivalent of maybe the FDIC insured bank account. More hassle, but more secure.
So let's back up a second because we jumped way ahead of where I intended to go. And I'm going to ask a white belt question. And I know the answer to this, but why is it valuable? Why does anybody even bother buying Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or whatever? Like,
Sure.
It's just made up fantasy digital money, and the only thing that gives it value is the demand for it, right?
So it is a shared delusion, just like all money. So why is a piece of paper with $100, with Benjamin Franklin on it or Lincoln on it, why is that valuable? Why, kind of an interesting thing, people struggle with the idea of electronic money, but that's what our bank accounts are, right? Like your money in your bank account is zeros and ones, and you trust that those zeros and ones won't change overnight against you. This is the same idea. So the same reason, the kind of follow-up question is, well, okay, the US dollar has value because the US government demands that you pay your taxes in it, because the US government has guns, because they have a military. So there's an argument that, okay, yeah, it's a shared delusion, it's kind of made up, there's nothing backing the US dollar, but a military, right? And Bitcoin doesn't have a military. So I think a key here is, like, if you look at the entire history of money is a societal consensus. So let me take a kind of slight diversion here. Why does real estate have value? Or what does it mean to say I own a house? When you say you own a house, what you really mean is society, by agreement, through our legal system and through our police enforcement system, will protect my ownership of this house if someone tries to take it. So if I try to live in your house, you'll call the police, they'll kick me out. And if they refuse to, you'll go to court and you'll sue me, or you'll get a judge to kind of evict me. And you trust that society won't pass laws that takes your house from you. You're trusting that that there's a consensus that we will respect property rights. So Bitcoin is exactly the same. It's open source code, and it relies on this idea that the participants in the system are going to kind of act in consensus in support of the system. It ultimately relies on game theory. The same way we trust that voters won't legislate to steal the property of 40%, right? So there's always a question, like, in a democracy, what prevents 60% of the country from just taking everything that belongs to the other 40% by passing laws? And the answer is kind of nothing. You're just trusting your fellow man to some degree. But in aggregate. So Bitcoin is based on this idea that any individual might be a bad actor, might want to steal from you. But if we create a system where the incentives are such that no group of people has an incentive to undermine the system because they're investors in that system.
Would there be a way to undermine the system?
Kind of.
To take government out of it for a second, because we'll get to that later. But absent government regulation, would there be a way to undermine it?
You mean like the real estate system?
No, the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin,
right.
Whatever.
Absolutely. So this is a constantly hotly debated topic. So this is one area where different cryptocurrencies differ. So we kind of get into the technical side of this a little bit. So how does Bitcoin work? It's a database that is immutable, meaning no one can change it. And the reason we know no one can change it is because every entry in the database contains a hash of everything above it. A hash is a mathematical one-way function that is basically a proof that nothing above it has been changed. So if I have a copy of the database and you have a copy, and you try to make a change, I can immediately detect it. Okay. I can see that something's changed because the proof no longer matches. The hash no longer matches. So right now, there's 40,000 nodes running the Bitcoin network. So literally, it's someone with a desktop computer or a server or a Raspberry Pi running the Bitcoin software. And all 40,000 people have a copy of the entire Bitcoin database. And so if I try to manipulate that or change it, all the other nodes, the other 30,999, will say no. We're not going to let you because it doesn't match what we see as the truth. So what happens if 25,000 of those nodes all decide to change reality, to create a new set of rules, to change the software? The answer is they can, and they do, and that's called a hard fork. So when a cryptocurrency wants to upgrade, when it wants to change its protocol for better or worse, when it wants to change the rules or when it wants to add a new feature, it requires that people basically upgrade their software. If only one person upgrades, they're now running a different network. They're running, instead of Bitcoin, they're running Ari Coin or J-Coin. So if the majority of the nodes decide to change the rules, they can and they do, and they then are running a new system. Sometimes what happens is...
that has happened? Huge groups have, quote-unquote, decided to do that? That's like...
Yeah. So in Bitcoin, it hasn't happened clearly or decisively, but in Ethereum, which is the second biggest cryptocurrency, Ethereum's a $20 billion cryptocurrency. A year ago it happened. What happened was there was basically a theft from one particular... It was kind of a company that was running on Ethereum. The term was the DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. It was basically an investment vehicle that existed on the Ethereum blockchain. And a thief, kind of simplifying, but a thief basically stole $50 million out of that vehicle. And the Ethereum community said, why don't we change the code to steal back the money? And a good chunk of the Ethereum community liked that idea, and they said, sure, we're gonna upgrade our code so that we change a rule so that we have stolen back the thief's money. And the other half of the community didn't like that. They said, the thief may have stolen, but it doesn't matter. This is computer code. And we need to be able to trust the code. And if we're just going to change the code anytime we feel like it, who's going to trust the system? So what happened was half the community changed their code to steal back the money, and the other half didn't. And so that led to two separate blockchains. One is now Ethereum, and it's $25 billion, and the other is called Ethereum Classic, which is worth a few $1 billion.
Jeez, that's wild.
If you owned Ethereum before that happened, you then owned both. You owned Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. Bitcoin is going through something similar and may fork in the next 5 to 6 months.
So one of the strengths of cryptocurrency is that it's decentralized. Mm-hmm. So how do you get 50% of the people? Like, do they send out a big email, or how is this like how do they centralize it enough to make that decision whether or not to do what they did?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's really, really hard. So one of the things that prevents collusion and malicious behavior is how hard it is to coordinate. So you think about like a cartel. So like OPEC, right? So you have an oil cartel, but if it involves more than just a few players, it's really hard to enforce. Everyone has incentive to cheat. So same's true here. So one of the things that protects the little guy from kind of being ganged up on is it's really hard to get 25,000 node operators to collude together. So in practice, what happens is someone will suggest a change. It will be hotly debated in the community for months, if not years. In Bitcoin, there's been a debate going on for 2 years now.
It's like debated on like Reddit, or like where does this happen?
So Reddit and Twitter and Slack channels and GitHub and all of these kind of channels. And it's really interesting. There's kind of an emergent consensus that arises from no particular place.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your mind around.
It is, and sometimes there isn't. So with Ethereum, there was no consensus. And so what happened was some people upgraded and some didn't. With Bitcoin right now, no one really knows what's going to happen. So on August 1st, there's something that's a little bit like a vote. Basically, people have launched code that will automatically change what they're running on August 1st. And they've announced this publicly, and there's a lot of coverage of it within the Bitcoin community, and everyone has a choice to either go with it or not. And no one really knows how many people support it. So there have been some online polls. There's a way to basically electronically vote if you run a node. Miners can kind of vote, but none of those things are binding, and none of them are. You can basically vote twice or three times. There are ways to kind of trick the system. So we don't really have a great indication.
Is there a way to be on the wrong side of that, or you own your Bitcoin and whatever happens?
Well, it's kind of that. So you own your Bitcoin as long as your Bitcoin are in your possession. So if your Bitcoin are on Coinbase and Bitcoin forks, it's not clear what Coinbase does. Coinbase might tell you ahead of time, but they might not.
Okay.
And so some exchanges, if you owned Ethereum and Ethereum forked, they only gave you back Ethereum, not Ethereum Classic. Basically, they kept half of your money. They kept the Ethereum Classic.
Okay.
If you own your Bitcoin, you'll have Bitcoin on every chain. Now, what's very possible is that only one chain will have economic value. So when we say there's multiple chains, if one guy in Siberia is running code that and you have Bitcoin on his network, that doesn't mean anything. You can't sell it. It has no value. So what we mean in practical terms is will exchanges list both networks? So with Ethereum, very quickly after the fork, many of the big exchanges listed both Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, and you were able to sell. And people did. They sold, they had 100 Ethereum. Now all of a sudden they find, I also have 100 Ethereum Classic. I'm going to sell that. And it's $2 each. I make $200. So in talking about the game theory, in terms of who runs Bitcoin, who decides what happens, there's no single answer, but mostly it comes down to what people think other people will pay for.
Right.
What's going to have economic value? So as a Bitcoin holder, this isn't that big a deal to you in the technical sense. You're going to own Bitcoin on every chain. You can just kind of sit it out. You can wait 6 months and see what has value and what doesn't. It's likely there will only be one surviving chain ultimately. And if there are multiple chains, you'll have multiple Bitcoins basically, and you can choose at some point to sell. The risk, though, is that the network splitting in two might devalue that network.
Right. Okay.
Two small networks is probably less valuable than one big one. And if the two networks go to war, if they attack each other with DDoS attacks and with there's a whole bunch of complex technical attacks they can do, there's a fear they could basically destroy each other.
Attack to what end?
So there's kind of economic warfare. So in Bitcoin, so we all have this shared database. How do you decide which transactions get added? So we all agree on the past. We all agree on every transaction that happened in the past because we have this hash, this proof.
Right.
But now we want to add transactions to the database. There needs to be some way of making sure we all agree before it gets added. So the people who do that in Bitcoin are called the miners. And the idea is the miners have to invest a massive amount of money. At this point, it's something like, it's at least $500 million in specialized hardware that solves meaningless math problems. And the idea is basically you impose this cost. You say, if you want to be a miner, we're going to make you make this massive fixed cost investment in hardware. So that...
And that's modeled after real mining. From what I understand, they kind of did that like to extract gold from the earth takes a major upfront investment. I don't know if that's the case, but what's the guy's...
That is where the term came from. So you're saying Satoshi Nakamoto?
Yeah. He modeled it more or less kind of after that.
I don't know if I phrased it quite the way. So the term mining definitely came from this idea that you have to put in work to extract gold, to extract precious metal. I don't know if I'd say modeled. So the idea here is you need a way to impose a cost on people to make them incentivized to not act maliciously. So the idea is that if someone has invested heavily in the Bitcoin network, if they personally, you have some miners who have $20 million of their own money in these specialized computer chips called ASICs that are only useful for Bitcoin mining. So if that miner acts maliciously, and let's say he's able to steal 100 Bitcoin from the Bitcoin network by double spending. So the idea here is basically the one big thing miners can do that's malicious is because they have some control over which transactions are added to the blockchain, they can spend the same Bitcoin twice. The way they do that is they spend a Bitcoin, and then they mine a block that doesn't include that transaction. And so they say, they basically get to erase the transaction, and so the Bitcoin appears back in their hand. So I'm a miner, I go to a Rolex dealer, I give them a Bitcoin, I get a Rolex, and then 20 minutes later, the Bitcoin is back in my hand. Because I mined a block that didn't have that transaction. So the premise here is that the miners could do that if they wanted. It'd be hard for them to do. There's only so many Bitcoin you can convert into real stuff in a very short window. And the idea is that a Bitcoin block is mined every 10 minutes. And every additional 10 minutes, things become more and more cemented in stone. It becomes exponentially more expensive to kind of rewrite the past. So if you control 50% of mining hash power, it'd be very easy to rewrite 10 minutes of the past, maybe even 20 or 30 minutes. But it becomes basically impossible to rewrite more than a day of the past history.
Okay.
So I get that this is kind of like technically complex. The main takeaway here is if I put $20 million into hardware, if I maliciously double spend and I steal $1 million, the network will immediately know, and the price of Bitcoin will probably collapse because the network is insecure, and my mining hardware will be worth less because I'm mining Bitcoin.
Right. It's not worth stealing that $1 million to see your $20 million investment
become 10.
Crash. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's a way of aligning the incentives. Hopefully,
that's the idea.
Yeah.
So people are experimenting with lots of other ways. So another kind of obvious, like if I asked you, how would you align incentives? So there's something called proof of stake, and the idea is basically you get to vote with your coins. So the idea is if I own 30% of all the Bitcoin in existence, maybe I can use my vote to steal an extra 5 Bitcoin, but that's going to devalue my 30%. So the idea is that people with more skin in the game have more incentive to protect the system.
Okay.
So people are trying to create new kind of proof mechanisms, new consensus mechanisms and it's really a game theory question, and it's a really interesting experimental. We don't know what works. We don't really know what works until there's billions of dollars at stake, and people have a massive incentive to game the system.
Now this is Bitcoin. Do most cryptocurrencies work similar, or can they just be all over the board with their own designs, some more wisely designed than others?
Yeah, so there's currently a lot of experimentation. So Bitcoin was the first, and it used this proof of work idea with miners having to buy chips, and they have to basically spend energy, electricity. The main cost is the physical chips plus the electricity. Proof of stake is now used in a lot of currencies as well, and there's experiments with like 10 other consensus mechanisms. So far, we kind of only have confidence in proof of work. Nothing else has really been tested well enough.
Okay. So now, there's no way the government does nothing.
Agreed.
So that's got to be a big fear for investors. For example, I'm not allowed to accept gold for jiu-jitsu payments. It's illegal. Right? As far as
I
you know.
didn't know. I didn't know.
I'm pretty sure that FDR made it illegal, and it's been illegal ever since then. I'll look it up afterward, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. I have to accept money. Or I guess I can accept Bitcoin. I did. I hope that this doesn't get me in trouble. And as I understand it, the Bitcoin gets taxed as capital gains. So I own it. It goes up in value. If I sell it, then I pay a cap gains tax on it. But I don't see any way the government, one, allows a currency to compete with its own currency, and two, they got to have their hands in for taxation purposes. I would assume beyond cap gains, but I guess I don't really know. But if you're collecting money every month, like a paycheck in Bitcoin every month, if they're not getting income tax out of that,
sure,
that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
So I agree. A really common question is will legislation shut it down? So first, Bitcoin is only 20-25% in the U.S. now. So Japan, China, South Korea, Argentina, Russia are all major players. And so if the U.S. government said anything Bitcoin related is illegal, if you transact, if you run a full node, if you do anything with Bitcoin, it's illegal, the Bitcoin price would absolutely tank on that announcement. But that would only be 20% of the world taken out. So to put this in perspective, 6 months ago, China represented something like 80% of all trading volume for Bitcoin. They actually had, the trading volume was a little bit misleading. So in China, you had exchanges that were kind of set up like casinos. They had very low fees. They encouraged tons and tons of trading. But China was a major hub for Bitcoin, and the government shut down those exchanges temporarily. They froze them. On that announcement, Bitcoin fell 30%, and 3 days later, it was back to its all-time high. And the realization was, wow, I guess China matters. It was a big part of the Bitcoin ecosystem, but this is now a global phenomenon. So I think if the U.S. banned Bitcoin or passed legislation, it wouldn't matter that much.
Yeah.
If the U.S. and Europe and China and every other developed nation did it, it would definitely have a freezing effect. It would tank the price, at least temporarily. I think Bitcoin at this point is kind of like a cockroach. I think it's very, very hard to kill. You can make it much harder to use. In some ways, it almost makes it more attractive. So when a government says, we forbid you from owning anything other than our fiat, anything other than our currency, the smart people run for the exit. And they say, man, I really need gold or Bitcoin now, because they're just going to depreciate the heck out of what they're forcing me to hold.
Right.
And a lot of the way Bitcoin is set up, many cryptocurrencies are structured this way, but not all of them. There's an emphasis on that anti-fragility, on that the term is censorship resistance. And censorship is a weird term to use here because we're not communicating.
Right.
But the idea is censorship refers to any information, including a monetary transmission. So those 40,000 nodes spread all over the world mean that even if every single node in the US, Europe, and China are shut down, if Bitcoin is still running on basically one Raspberry Pi in Siberia, the network is up and running.
Okay.
Wouldn't be much of a network at that point, but realistically, if of the 40,000, 30,000 were shut down, the network would be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that cryptocurrency it's the genie out of the bottle at this point. There's nothing governments can do. It's the future, and it'll just be interesting to see. I mean, this is basically what F.A. Hayek was advocating for decades ago, was competing currencies. It was not allowed. The government wanted the monopoly on, their fiat money,
Sure.
different things around the country or around the world. But now there's no stopping it. Whether they like it or not, they're going to have to compete with these cryptocurrencies. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
So a lot of them, so China is planning on launching a governmental cryptocurrency.
I did read about that.
Very explicitly.
Yeah.
And in many ways, so the idea of going cashless, if you're a libertarian, you hate that idea, because that means the government gets to see every single transaction you do. Every single payment, anything you spend money on, the government knows. From the government's perspective, that's great, because they have much more direct control over monetary policy. They can increase or decrease the money supply with a mouse click.
Yeah.
They can tax effectively. They can monitor your illegal activity. It's wonderful from their perspective. As a citizen who cares about kind of your privacy, your freedom, your rights to store wealth, for example, it's very unattractive, because it means the government could, with a click of a button, confiscate all your money.
That's another genie out of the bottle, though. Cash is disappearing all over the world. It's some countries quicker than others. I was reading about how Italy is like, they don't trust their government, right? So they want to accept a lot of money in cash. America's, cash is being used less and less. People are comfortable with credit and debit. So at some point, I think whether we like it or not, that's another thing that's going to happen.
There will certainly be a push for it. I think a lot comes down to the citizenry. So I read an interesting article recently about how in one of the larger prisons, the thing used as money were canned sardines. And what was interesting was the sardines, obviously a value, people liked them, they were protein rich. But after expiration, they would still be traded.
Yeah.
So they were eating sardines and trading sardines, and the trading sardines would trade at something like a 50% discount. But they still have value. You couldn't eat them, they were rotten. And so the idea is that people need money, and if there's a demand for something, if there's a demand for a currency that the government can't track, something like that will have value. Yeah. I think people will use it; they'll imbue it with value.
Cigarettes in the wars and in the concentration camps, anything will do. That you can trade. But yeah, it's really interesting to think about the cryptocurrency competing with the cash. And so let's talk about decentralization a little bit. Mm-hmm. That's often said to be the big strength of cryptocurrency. And would you say it's because the government can't get its paws on it? Is that the main benefit of it?
Yes, I wouldn't say just. I don't like framing it as the government not getting its paws. Especially in America, people tend to interpret that as, well, you must be doing something illegal because the government's not that bad. More broadly, I would just say decentralization means resiliency from any kind of malicious actor. So that malicious actor could be, it could be a corrupt judge, an oppressive regime. It could be your government. It could be a future world government.
Right. We take so much for granted in the U.S. I'm not even thinking about all those ways that people get ripped off in other countries.
Yeah, yes. And people tend to think this is a binary. Like, okay, well, you have an oppressive, brutal regime, you have Nazi Germany, or you have the U.S. And the reality is most countries are somewhere in the middle. So in Argentina, you have the rule of law. You have a basically kind of legal framework, legal society. But you have some corrupt judges who will take a bribe and transfer the title of your real estate to someone else. Yeah. Even in the U.S., we have civil asset forfeiture, and we have the IRS freezing accounts pre-trial. So right now, there are people who are in a jail cell. They haven't been convicted of anything. They're suspected of, say, tax fraud, and all of their money is frozen, so they can't hire a lawyer. But that's a minor example. Most of us in America have a relative, whether we know it or not, who at some point had to sew valuables into their clothes to flee a Cambodia, Nazi Germany, a North Korea, a China during the 70s. Most of the world in the last 50 years at some point has experienced an oppressive regime where the ability to escape the country required you to have access to some money, and the ability to be able to cross a border without your family starving meant you needed a little bit of wealth too.
So we're just assuming with cryptocurrency that there'll always be an internet. That's the big.
Absolutely. So if the internet goes down, cryptocurrency goes down. If you ask me about like the true tail risk to cryptocurrency, if an EMP goes off, an electromagnetic pulse that fries every circuit board in the world, it's worth noting that the banking system's gone, all your money in your bank account's gone, your credit cards are gone, so it's not. Similarly, people ask me about quantum computing. So there's a question of, can quantum computing will it hack the encryption? And the answer is maybe, but if it does, the encryption in Bitcoin is stronger than the encryption your bank uses. Okay. So if quantum computing basically destroys Bitcoin, we have much bigger things to worry about. It basically means our entire global modern system is gone, or at least under threat.
Now, do you think, so the competing currencies theory that Hayek pushed was, basically no centralized government money, or there could be, but it has to compete against private money. Now, that was before cryptocurrency existed, but that would be gold, silver, crypto, cigarettes, fiat cash, or whatever. And the idea would probably be that one would win out in the market. And that's what we're thinking for crypto. Like, there's so many now. Do you think it'll whittle down to one or two?
Somewhere in between. So I definitely think this is something that no one really knows. The term is crypto economics. It's kind of viewed almost as a new field. It's an extension of economics, but combined with this really interesting game theory, competitive strategy. So my view, and I say this humbly, we're all still learning. It's so new in this experiment.
Real quickly, just to back you up. So you've mentioned game theory a few times, and I just want to make sure. So you're talking about an equilibrium where all players, they have a optimal setting, and if one goes out of equilibrium, it screws up the whole thing. Is that explain exactly what you're saying with that?
Yeah. So I'm using the term to mean you have a bunch of players with a set of incentives, and we're trying to figure out what the system does with that set of players and that set of circumstances and that set of incentives. So, for example, like the classic example is the prisoner's dilemma. So if the police arrest two prisoners and they tell each of them, if you rat out the other one, you go free, but the other guy gets 10 years in prison. And they tell both prisoners that. And if neither of you rat the other one out, you both spend a year in prison. But if you both rat each other out, you both spend 8 years in prison. So the optimal solution is neither one should talk, and they both get 1 year in prison. But it's called prisoner's dilemma, because each person, if they assume the other person doesn't talk, they should rat the other guy out, because then they get 0 years. So realistically, what often happens is both people rat each other out, and they both get 8 years. So game theory is exploring that situation, and ones like it.
It's really good that you were able to rattle off the prisoner's dilemma on command. Because I've read about that a bunch of times, but it would have come out of my mouth all backwards and all jarbled.
I was pleasantly surprised myself. But I
got it right. You went right into it. Yeah. Right. So it's just figuring out that equilibrium basically is optimal for all the players involved.
Right. Well, so what's interesting, like in the prisoner's dilemma, there's the optimal for everyone, and it's the dilemma because it doesn't happen. So even though, like, looking at it from kind of top down, we know what everyone should do, but because every individual has this set of incentives, they end up screwing over one another. Yeah. So Bitcoin, there's a lot of time went into thinking, how do we create a set of incentives such that if we assume everyone is a jerk, everyone is trying to steal, they still don't. To use an analogy to modern capitalism, we have strong reputational systems in kind of modern commerce. So, like, I work in finance. A lot of people in finance are not fundamentally good or bad. They are kind of optimizing. They're selfish, but that selfishness doesn't necessarily lead to bad behavior. If they're in a system where they think, I can get really, really, really rich if I act ethically and I build a great reputation and I earn good returns for my investors, I make good money for them and I get super rich. And so they do, because they want to maximize their own return. If you plug that same person into a system where the way they can get rich is by hurting people, some of them will.
Right.
So part of, I think, our goal as a society is to create a structure, a set of incentives where the average person, through their own self-interest, does good. That's kind of the premise of capitalism, right? Adam Smith said, we want a system where every individual merchant acting in their own self-interest ends up optimizing for society.
So we got down this path. We're talking about competing currencies.
So I don't need to dodge that question. So how many will there be? So right now, there's something like 800 cryptocurrencies have been invented, there's something like 100 active ones right now. Very roughly, something like 50 that have a market cap of over 100 million, which is kind of incredible. And that number is much higher than it was even 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Most will go to zero, but that statement isn't that different from looking at restaurants or any company. If you look at the S&P 500, most of those companies will eventually go to zero. That's the nature of competition. In terms of the equilibrium, I think, this is my view, cryptocurrencies serve some very different functions. So the one we've been talking about mostly is stored value, digital gold. That's what Bitcoin mostly tries to be. I think that's kind of winner take all. Now, by winner take all, that doesn't mean literally one and no one else, but that means probably, if in 10 years, if we do another podcast, it probably means that, let's say this is a $5 trillion market at that point. My guess is 4 trillion of that belongs to one cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And then maybe the next biggest one is 700 billion. And the next one after that is 100 billion. So, kind of like what we see with, like, Amazon. Like, there are other online merchants, but it's a huge drop-off after Amazon. There are other niches, though. So, we talked a lot about Bitcoin. So let me give you an example of one other really kind of very different use case that's very exciting. So there's something called Filecoin that's going to be coming out very soon. Filecoin is a token that you use to buy or sell file storage. So on your computer, you might have excess file storage. You install an application, and you have the option of renting out excess file storage. And someone can choose to, there's an application that will automatically encrypt files so no one else can read them, and then kind of store them on multiple computers. The cool thing about that is not just that maybe you earn a little extra money, it's that by putting a price tag on this asset, you now create a market for it.
Right.
So you think about the entire internet economy, you think about a Facebook, a LinkedIn, none of that could exist without the ability to monetize a click or an impression on an ad. The entire business model of the internet relies on basically Google AdWords. This idea that we can create a marketplace for an eyeball, for a view of a web page. The ability to create a market for file storage or for CPU cycles or for, Uber did it for kind of unused cars. If you have excess capacity, Airbnb did it for, you've got a spare guest room, you're going to be on holiday. It brings capitalism to these areas that didn't really have capitalism. So now you have a market, and now you're going to have more efficient allocation of resources.
Right.
And the cryptocurrency helps that because it's a token that is native to the application that is distributing the file storage. So you could use US dollars. You could say, hey, I'm going to rent some file storage from you, and I'm going to give you US dollars. But that would require a separate transaction. I'd need to PayPal you money, or I'd need a credit card. And so with the cryptocurrency, it's actually built into the application itself.
I was just reading the other day about how many different kinds of currency there is right now. We think of money, we think of cryptocurrency, but even like frequent flyer miles is its own market. People trade that for other goods and services. And it's really interesting to think of all the ways that trade is facilitated in all the different markets these days that the internet allows, kind of like what you're saying. I've dealt in frequent flyer miles before, and I should know that that's obviously a form of currency in the way I'm using it, but it just never occurred to me to think about it that way,
Yes. Yeah. And we're going to see more of that in cryptocurrency. That's not it's not a giant use case. I don't think we're going to have $1 trillion in that, but cryptocurrency as rewards points, as loyalty points, as the equivalent of airline miles. Another really interesting use case is cryptocurrency is open source. And if you think about the internet, the people who created basically the fundamental protocols of the internet, they didn't get rich. So the people who created HTTP, TCP/IP, these basic communication layers on which everything else is built, because it was open source, it was very hard to monetize. Who got rich? The people who made the applications, Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon, right? They're all using that stuff, but they're getting rich because it's not open source. Cryptocurrency lets an open source developer monetize their work. So what I can do is, let's say I create an open source game, a casino. Let's say an online casino, but it's open source. Anyone can copy the code. What I can do is I can write that code so that to play in my casino, you have to use a token that I issue. And I keep 10% of the tokens, and the rest I sell. And they're traded on an exchange. So if my casino is popular, the value of the token will rise because people will have to buy it to get in and play. So it aligns incentives. It lets me monetize my open source.
This is going back to, we've had this before, with banks issuing their own currency, and then the banks that had good reputations, their currency was more valuable and stuff before the government kind of took over the monopoly on it. So it's kind of weird. Like it's
an interesting analogy.
The cycle's like goes up one way, falls down, and then moves in another. The same thing repeating. It's weird to think about. And Yeah, like I said, just how the government, whether it allowed this to happen or it's probably not possible to stop it. It'll be fascinating to see, but I don't see them not fighting.
I agree. There will be crackdowns. There will be, the earliest adopters of cryptocurrency were self-described cypherpunks and cyber anarchists. Many of them wanted it to succeed. They had a libertarian mindset. They wanted central banks to fall. And it's really interesting. I personally am ambivalent. I don't know what the future will look like, but if cryptocurrency market cap continues to rise, it will put pressure on central banks. It will put pressure on fiat. And at some point, you could have a war between blockchains and governments. And it's an interesting thing about what that could look like. So if you have, let's say Bitcoin is worth $1 trillion. Let's just say, so it's at 45 billion now in 10 years or 15 years. And governments are trying to shut it down. You'll have all of these people who are among the world's richest who have most of their wealth in Bitcoin. They'll have a massive incentive to influence elections, to lobby governments, to buy elections, right? So it's really, I'm very interested to know what that kind of warfare will look like, but it's not, the blockchains will have some weapons at their disposal, particularly perhaps massive economic resources.
Yeah. So we've debated politics over the years many times. Has this moved you in a more libertarian direction, this whole thing? You've said that word like 4 or 5 times now in our discussion, at least when it comes to currency, you seem to really like this decentralized aspect. And has it budged you in any direction, or is it just whatever? It's just a side thing you're doing. Doesn't matter to your personal politics.
It certainly makes me think about it a lot. I don't know that it's changed my view. Part of the issue, to the extent I have libertarian sentiments, it largely comes out of fear, like as it does for many libertarians, fear of governmental overreach, particularly in its worst forms, in the most tyrannical. So it's not so much the annoyance of having to deal with regulation for me. It's much more the threat of true tyranny. And so I really like the idea, like using that analogy of having to sew valuables into your clothes to escape an oppressive regime, fleeing with your life. The idea of having something Bitcoin available to those people is very, very attractive to me.
I read an interview, either Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, one of them. Their initial motivation for starting PayPal was so people could have their money safe from the government. Right. Not the U.S. government, but around the world and stuff. That was a big motivating factor. And I don't think it worked out the way they wanted. I think they eventually just caved to the regulation. Cryptocurrency is like PayPal 2.0 as far as, what it can accomplish to protect people from all the terrible things that has happened throughout history that we take for granted that won't happen.
So I agree. So that's the good side. Here's the bad side. If cryptocurrency does what I think it's going to do, which is dramatically increase in value, and if it starts taking power away from governments, people like to talk about it as a democratizing force, but it's likely to increase the concentration of wealth. So Bitcoin is held by a relatively small number of people today. Most of those people are not going to sell. So if Bitcoin becomes worth $1 trillion or $5 trillion, you're going to have a very small number of people who control a massive amount of wealth. Yeah. It's inherently very deflationary, hyper-deflationary. So, and as we know, hyperdeflation is not usually good for economies. Where we can talk about whether like a tiny bit of deflation is maybe okay, but a massive deflationary spiral is almost always very, very bad. Also, I think I'm not an anarchist. I think governments do bring value, and I think if governments basically lose complete control, if they don't have tax revenue, if they can't kind of police the monetary system at all, a lot of the good they do, including providing social safety nets, becomes very problematic. It's not obvious to me that the new Bitcoin rich will provide, the hospitals and social welfare kind of safety net that I think has value.
And for it to blow up, you think basically, I'm not just stating, you would think all it would take is 5 or 10 or 20 major retailers to start accepting it, like basically Amazon, Starbucks, Walmart. They're like, hey, we deal in Bitcoin now, and that's pretty much off to the races.
So you can spend Bitcoin at a great many places already. I don't think that's the issue. Here's how I see this unfolding. It's not even what needs to happen. It's, I think, what is happening. So when I recommend, when I told people to buy Bitcoin 2 years ago, it was mostly, what's that? Why is it a value? Today, when I tell people to buy Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency, they all say, oh yeah, I believe it's going up. The obstacle is all operational. So it's a hassle to buy. It's a hassle to store. People are scared they're going to hit a wrong button and lose their money. If you're an endowment or a pension, it's very hard to invest because you're a fiduciary. You have a legal responsibility to be a caretaker of the money. And right now, if someone invests in for example, a cryptocurrency hedge fund manager, it's very hard to be confident that they can't just steal your money. there aren't good custodial services, there isn't prime brokerage, there aren't all of these safeguards that investors generally rely on. So currently, the entire market cap of cryptocurrency is $100 billion. It's less than McDonald's. It's nothing.
Right.
So to put that in perspective, there are pension funds in the U.S. that, as individual funds, control more than $100 billion. They could buy all cryptocurrency in existence as one particular pension fund. Once pension funds, and some of these pension managers, I talk to them, they're interested. They're very interested in buying. The problem is they can't put $50 million on Coinbase because it's an exchange and they have trouble trusting it.
Right.
And they certainly can't leave it there because if Coinbase goes bankrupt, they're not clear they get their money. And for them to store, so I mentioned the Trezor, a hardware wallet, for them to store $50 million on this little piece of hardware that is relatively new and relatively untested, they can't do that, right?
Right.
It's too scary. So what's going to happen, I think, over the next 2 years is we're going to have things like an ETF, and that adds tremendous sense of security and ease. When you can buy Bitcoin in your IRA, when it's insured, like here's another example. So there are products that are going to be issued by Citibank, for example, insured by Lloyd's of London, that are structured notes or ETNs or similar investment vehicles that are tied to the price of Bitcoin, but issued by a bulge bracket bank, insured by Lloyd's of London. As those things become popular, it becomes much easier for people to make giant investments.
So basically, the demand will spike once the barriers to entry go down a little bit, and that'll drive the price. Why might, theoretically, why couldn't this exact same story be told about, gold, for example? Why couldn't we just all decide that we want to invest more in gold as a store of value, and that shoots up at, 20-fold? It seems like it's just speculation. Why pick one over the other, right?
So the main, for Bitcoin in particular, I keep using this term unseizable store of value, or the term probably that's preferred by the community is censorship resistant. If the government can take your gold, you can't, try to move $1 million worth of gold out of South Korea. Try to move $1 million worth of gold out of China. Try to move $1 million worth of gold out of the U.S. You have a bar of gold in your bag going through customs. You're going to be detained by the TSA. You may have to sue to get it back in court.
Right. I guess they could raid the storage. I'm thinking more you have gold or silver or whatever in...
like the Bank of New York?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's transferable through debit, credit, or whatever.
Well, so the issue there is you're entirely trusting a third party.
Right.
It's not yours. So you think about the oppressor regime scenario, it's not that hard to imagine. I mean, you look at what just happened in India. So in India, they had demonetization. The government announced literally out of the blue, totally blindsided everyone, that fiat in high denominations, I'm not sure what the cutoff was. I think it was something like $20. It wasn't that high.
Yeah.
Suddenly had no value. Imagine if the federal government... So in the 1930s, the U.S. banned gold ownership.
Right.
It's not that hard to imagine, maybe not the U.S., but Russia or China or India saying, hey, that gold you have sitting in that bank vault, it's not yours.
It's going to seize it. Yeah.
It's not yours. You no longer have legal title to it. And so a key premise of Bitcoin in particular and cryptocurrency is there is no trusted third party. You're not relying on a bank. You're not relying on a vault guard. You're not relying on a government to enforce the fact that, what happens if the bank says they own it? You would then have to sue the bank in federal court and get a judge to agree to order the bank to give you back the gold.
Yeah.
Right? You're relying on this complex system that if you want your gold, you get it. With Bitcoin, there is no individual, no party, no organization that can confiscate it.
I was going to do some research before talking to you, so I kind of would think of some intelligent questions to ask. Then I was like, screw it. I mean, the whole point of talking to you is to kind of get a better understanding. So why do research when I can just talk to you? And I figure most people that listen, all 13 of them, will probably know as much as me, so I have the similar kind of questions. But it's still hard for me. It's still my brain is having trouble. I get that it's an alternative currency, and I get that it doesn't exist in the real world, so it's safe. And I get that it can be used like anything as a medium of exchange, but it's still just weird to try to wrap your head around how it's built through all the nodes and everything.
But you should take some comfort in almost... So really smart people tend to take something like 6 months to get this. It took me 18 months.
Yeah.
So and I think the reason for that is it's so new. So an analogy I like is imagine you were trying to explain the value of Facebook as a company to Warren Buffett 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You have a brilliant investor. The problem is it's not just explaining social media to him. You first need to build up this entire web of, Facebook has value today partly because everyone's a mobile phone. We're all on our phones all the time, so we access social media all the time. So Bitcoin, to me, I think it's a little similar in that there are all these pieces. So there's a database, there's the game theory, there's this idea of value by consensus, not backed by anything. There's this value of censorship resistance, decentralization. They're kind of all these individual pieces. Another one being that it's deflationary. So
deflationary in that it's going to go up in value?
Well, I certainly can't promise that. I think it's likely, but there's risk. No, deflationary in terms of supply. So supply is fixed at a maximum 21 million Bitcoin ever. There is no bank that can print it.
It hits the top and it's never going higher.
And it's done.
Got it. Yeah.
So it's the way it's structured is every 4 years the amount produced falls by half. So right now there's an inflation rate of 4% a year. In a few years it's going to fall to 2% a year, then 1%, then 0.5. So
how close are we to the top?
Pretty close. So I think we're at something like 16.5 million right now, out of 21 million total, and that remainder is going to be printed over the next 100 years.
Okay.
So we're at a 4% inflation rate. Like it's a very, very, very low inflation rate already. And so if you have here's a crazy statistic. If when people ask me why would I think Bitcoin would go up 10-fold, 20-fold, 100-fold, here's kind of the simple math. So there's going to only ever be 21 million Bitcoin.
And they can't have a council and get 100% of people to agree to change that and change it?
Well, so if most of the community decided to run code that said there are 50 million Bitcoin, there would be.
Okay.
But why would they? Why would
right,
they?
If they own so much of it, that's just going to be inflationary.
Right. You're probably not going to participate in that. And if maybe there's a scenario that I can't foresee where I, as a Bitcoin owner, would want that, then maybe I want that. But there's no bank that's going to print money so that the government can spend it. Right? There's basically the community as a whole has to say we think we benefit from more Bitcoins existing.
Right, yeah. So why would they devalue their own currency?
Right. Yeah. So right now the biggest broker, the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in the US right now is a site called Coinbase. Coinbase has something like 8 million accounts today. They're adding 30,000 accounts a day. Coinbase only lets you buy Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Litecoin, and most of the people on it are buying Bitcoin. So you've got 16.5 million Bitcoin in existence, very few being produced every year, and 30,000 people a day who want to own it.
That's staggering. Yeah.
So in a year, just 1 year, if nothing horrible goes wrong with Bitcoin, there will be basically an auction battle to own one Bitcoin. And so what happens to the price when people are basically, when you have 5 people fighting to own one Bitcoin? It becomes a bidding war.
Yeah, I've watched it go up and up and up, and every time I think to myself, oh, it's too high. And then a month, 2 months go by, and I'm like, it's even higher. I should have got it then. And same thing with the stock market. Truly, I've been watching the stock NVIDIA Corp, watching it go up and up and up and up. And every time I was like too high. And then I finally freaking bought it. And it's still gone up, but I'm like, I know I must be buying it near the top. It's got to be. And I can't shake that feeling with Bitcoin. But the way you just put it there, 30,000 people bidding for it, new accounts a day. Yeah, that's pretty staggeringly high number.
Yeah. Now, everything I say, so Bitcoin could go to zero. Right. I could rattle off 10 ways that could happen. And so it's not free money. It's not a free lunch. There is risk. The way I frame it when people ask, well, how much should I buy is imagine that it's 50% to go to zero and 50% to be worth 10x what it is today, what is now in 5 years. How would you size that bet? That's an amazing bet. You don't, in finance and investing and trading, you never see that bet, but it is risky, right? You don't max out your credit cards to bake that bet. So everyone needs to kind of figure out their risk tolerance.
When it hits its 21 billion cap, or is that what you said? 21 million cap, it seems likely to me that might be a time a competitor starts really turning up the heat too, right? If there's still demand and it's gotten sky high in price.
So if that happens at that point, so first that 21 million doesn't get hit for 100 years,
right?
If by the time it's hit, it's very likely that Bitcoin has either died completely or has become a 10 trillion plus asset. That it is, if not the money of the world, then it's the preferred non-fiat money. At that point, it becomes very hard. It'd be like someone saying, "I'm going to launch a new gold." Yeah. Well, gold's gold. It's really hard to launch a new So a good line in kind of both tech and corporate strategy is, if there's an incumbent that has a massive network effects, like a Facebook, you can't displace the incumbent by being a little bit better. You can't become the next Coca-Cola by being 5% cheaper or by tasting 1% better. Right. You need to be an order of magnitude better. You need to be 10x better. So the idea is Bitcoin is in many ways 10x or 100x better than gold. Not in every way, but in some very important ways. So a possibility of one way Bitcoin goes to zero is if someone creates a cryptocurrency. People have already created cryptocurrencies that as code are a little bit better than Bitcoin. because they looked at what Bitcoin did. They saw some obvious room for improvement because they were launching something new. It was very easy to just edit the code. To edit the Bitcoin code as exists in the current network requires consensus. It's very hard to make change. So there are cryptocurrencies that are better than Bitcoin as protocols. They make small improvements, but they don't win. They don't take over because it's like people don't go from Facebook to Facebook 2.0 for a small improvement.
Right.
But maybe someone will invent something that's 10 times or 100 times better as code.
Right. Google Plus might have been better than Facebook, but not better enough to take over. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is a possibility. But as Bitcoin becomes bigger, its network effects become stronger.
Yeah.
And it becomes harder to displace. Every day it becomes harder to kill from its throne.
So now with your hedge fund that you're working on, you're going to invest in many cryptocurrencies? Mm-hmm. Okay. So
right now there's probably, say, 40 that we can invest in that are big enough.
Okay.
And mostly the top 20, just because of size. So if you have a cryptocurrency that's a $10 million coin, it's very hard if you're running a hedge fund with a decent amount of money to trade actively in that. But yeah, so there's some funds that are trying to be like basically mutual funds. They're buy and hold. They're trying to be Warren Buffett. They're saying, okay, we've got these 100 coins. We're going to pick the 10 best ones and just hold them.
Yeah.
And I think that'll work. I think there are people who are going to do it really, really well. I'm actually invested in one fund that's doing that myself. The strategy of my fund is much more active. So we're saying that, I was an active trader of commodities and bonds and equity derivatives. All of those same strategies apply, or in currencies. I mean, these things trade like currencies. Yeah. It's not that different from trading the yen-dollar pair. Things like arbitrage, statistical arbitrage, relative value, momentum, mean reversion, event-driven, responding to news announcements, and trading off of news.
What are the transaction costs of buying and selling these things, like on Coinbase or whatever?
So Coinbase is a broker, and they charge kind of a premium for that. So what that means is you go into Coinbase and you tell them I want to buy one Bitcoin, and you have one Bitcoin. You don't have to deal with an exchange. You don't see kind of all the bids and offers.
Okay.
So they charge you a total of something like 2%. Coinbase has an associated exchange called GDAX, and there are a bunch of exchanges that are very similar to GDAX, where the typical fee is something like 15 or 25 basis points. So that's a lot compared to equities, but nothing compared to the volatility of these things. So, if you had to pay 25 basis points to buy Bitcoin when it's 1,000, and then a day later it's 1,100, it's a pretty small cost relative to the volatility.
But there's nothing like when I do my trades through TD Ameritrade, they just charge me $6.95 a trade. There's nothing like that. It's always a percentage of the value.
I haven't yet seen an exchange that's. I can't say for international exchanges. I don't know of any exchanges that do a flat dollar fee.
Okay.
There's some though that are free, and they have some other model. So a lot of the Chinese exchanges are free to trade, and they'll charge you to, for example, withdraw money. So they'll say, okay, deposit as much as you want, trade as much as you want. When you withdraw, we take 2%. So they're different business models.
I'm going to pull up my Bread wallet right now on my phone. So I go in here, give me one sec. It gives me the option to buy Bitcoin. So when I click on that, 1% fee, it says, delivered in 4 to 6 days. So I would have to link my bank account and then...
So that delay is because they're waiting for an ACH deposit from your bank to clear it.
Okay. So after the first time, that'll be eliminated, you think? Or
So I don't know Bread Wallet, but probably not. So, and the delay there is the banking system. So an ACH transfer is one way of moving money from a bank to any company, and it takes usually 4 days. There are plenty of exchanges that will take a wire. So, for example, both Coinbase and a competitor, Gemini, of the Winklevoss twins, I can wire money from my bank to them, and then 3 hours later I can convert it to Bitcoin, and I can pull the Bitcoin off almost immediately.
Now, when it says 4 to 6 days, it'll be at the price that I bought it.
Yes, almost all. I mean, I'm not familiar with Bread Wallet, but that usually they'll lock in a price for you.
And you can buy not full Bitcoins. You can buy a percentage of a Bitcoin, right?
Absolutely. So Bitcoin is divisible. I want to say 8 decimal points. There's actually a story behind it where they said if Bitcoin became the money of the world, and they estimated if Bitcoin replaced all money, and its market cap was whatever that comes out to, something like 50 trillion. How divisible does it need to be so that everyone could still have 1 penny worth of Bitcoin?
Right.
And they made it that many decimal points. So currently you can divide a Bitcoin into the equivalent of something like 1/1000th of a penny.
Okay. So regardless of the price of Bitcoin, if I feel like throwing $500 in there tomorrow,
no problem.
It'll just give me that.
If you want to buy $5 worth, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I remember you telling me a couple years ago that you were getting into this, and I just remember thinking, like, you told me all the reasons. Like, it's if this happens, this is going to happen. And I was just like, man, I don't know. And I got to give you credit because you've been talking it up. You gave anyone who follows you, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, had they listened with just 1% of their money, it would have been pretty good for them so far. But that can change at any point.
It can, and there's also hindsight bias. So
right.
There were risks that have passed safely. And like the fact that you've been a trader, right? The fact that a trade worked doesn't even mean it was a good trade,
right? Yeah.
Right? You might have gotten lucky. And my confidence in this thesis has grown with my own knowledge and understanding, and also as Bitcoin becomes bigger, it becomes more likely to succeed. Just their network, right? Same with, it's like in retrospect, we can say, oh, Amazon was obvious, Facebook was obvious. But Facebook could have failed in its second year. There could have been other competitors. Amazon wasn't destined to be Amazon. It had to execute every day for 15 years.
Yeah. The more jiu-jitsu students I get, the faster I grow because they got friends, they talk to people. That's the same exact thing.
Yeah, powerful network effects. Yeah. It's really interesting to see. So 3 months ago, when I was talking to colleagues in the financial world about it, very few people cared. Very few people. There was vague interest. When I talked about pushing them to invest, it was fear. It was, if I do this, it might ruin my career. They were very, very focused on what they could lose, both professionally, reputationally. Now it's shifting to FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah. So
now it's, if I don't invest in this, am I going to get in trouble? If other endowments invest in Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes up 200% next year, like it looks like it's going to go into this year, will I get called into the president of the university's office and have to explain why I underperformed my colleagues?
Yeah.
And individuals, it's the same thing, right? So as a trader, you know how dangerous that is. So while cryptocurrency as a whole I'm very, very bullish on, there are bubbles. There are pockets of bubbles.
Right, so when that FOMO locks in. I can't help but wonder if it's just that, because I knew about Bitcoin early on because I read a lot of libertarian literature, but also I can't help but wonder how much the literature influences me to just see bubbles everywhere. Like I feel like we're in a housing bubble, I feel like we're in a stock market bubble, and then people that I know that don't know dick about anything are talking about crypto. You know what I'm saying? Like people that I know that have never bought a stock, have never done anything, they're like, man, I'm going to get some Bitcoin. That to me is telling me like, man, this is when these people are talking about it, maybe it's a little about to pop.
I totally get that. So I looked at Bitcoin a bit when it was around $100 in early 2013. And the problem is that it just rallied from $1. Right. How do you buy something that's up 100x? Right. Isn't that the definition of stupid? Something's parabolic, it just went up 100x. How do you buy it, right? And that was part of my reason not to buy it. So I totally get it. As a trader, you don't want to buy into the top, especially 100x, right? How do you buy it? And the way that I've kind of overcome that, that skepticism is always healthy. Always. Anything that's up sharply, anytime you hear people too enthusiastic about it, you should be skeptical. But it's by having this conviction in the fundamental economic demand for what Bitcoin can do. And I keep using the term Bitcoin. Bitcoin, as I said, I think it's 50% to fail. That's a guesstimate. I have no, that's not a precise number. Bitcoin could fail, and if it does, something will take its place. It's a little bit like people will say, what are the odds the whole thing dies? My answer is, it's a little bit like saying, what are the odds the automotive industry dies?
Right, yeah.
What are the odds
out of the bottle, like we said, yeah.
It's just, there's a demand. Or here's another one. So banking crises happen periodically in countries. It's not unimaginable that a banking system in the U.S. could collapse. But 10 years later, there'd be a banking system. Because banking, at its core, serves a fundamental need. Right? Just making loans. People want transportation. So yeah, the automotive companies could all fail, but there'd be automotive companies 5 years later because people want cars.
Yeah.
Same thing. Bitcoin could die. Every existing cryptocurrency could die, and a year later there'd be new ones because there's demand.
Yeah. Why do you suppose there's demand? Do you think it's lack of confidence in other money, or do you think it's why do people want it?
So it's the unseizable store value, the censorship resistance. Part of it is central banks around the world are depreciating their currency. So you look at the Fed's balance sheet. Every smart investor is asking themselves, what can I do to protect myself against the currency being depreciated? And so for a while, that was get into real estate, get into financial assets, get into commodities, but everything looks expensive. To most of the people I talk to, most endowment people,
everything looks expensive to me.
yeah. I mean, I go to conferences with pension managers and all that, and we say, well, okay, equities look expensive. This isn't to say that equities are a horrible investment, but they're not screaming value. No one loves them. So you're looking for how do I diversify away from the U.S. dollar, and not just the U.S. dollar, because it's also Japanese yen,
every
and it's most areas of the world.
Well, that's what also makes me fear a little bit about the bubble is that I agree everyone's looking for a thing, but I also agree that if it's a bubble and it pops, that's not the end of it.
Yep.
Whether it's Bitcoin or something else,
So in terms of like how to think of it if it's a bubble. So first, I have kind of this fundamental argument that I think fundamental demand for the unseizable store value is well over gold. So gold's $7 trillion right now. I think it's way over that because I think cryptocurrency is better than gold at what it does. And we're at 100 billion now total. So that's a lot of room to grow before it would fundamentally be a bubble. Now, from a trade, I think it's useful to say, something can be a bubble in the sense that it's fundamentally overvalued, or it can be a bubble in the trading sense that people are margin long, and it might flash crash, you know? So, it's very, Bitcoin was in a bubble when it rallied to $1,000 in 2013. That sounds weird, right? So I'm saying Bitcoin fundamentally should be $100,000 a coin, or it could be. So how was it a bubble in 1,000? It was in a bubble in 1,000 because the people who had pushed it up from, say, 500 to 1,000 were weak hands who were buying on margin, who were buying with money they couldn't afford to lose, and who were going to run for the exits at the first sign of trouble. And that's what they did. So what we're seeing is every day new strong hands buying, new new buyers, new marginal money, much of which won't get shaken out.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin has fallen something like 80% 5 separate times.
Okay.
It's rallied from 10 cents to $2,500, and it's fallen 80% 5 times along that path. I don't know that it's going to fall 80% again, but even if it succeeds, it'll definitely have some 50% falls. Yeah. I would bet if Bitcoin ends up at 100,000, along that path, it will absolutely have at least a few 50% falls, possibly another 80%.
Yeah.
But there are enough people who will see that as buying opportunity.
Right.
Yeah. Buy that dip.
Yeah. When it becomes an institutional investment, it's not libertarians in the basement trying to, mess around with something they don't understand. Anything else you think you can tell me to get this going, or should we start winding this down? I know a lot more than I did. I don't know all the technical aspects, but I don't want to know it. I don't need to know it. Yeah. I don't care. The practical stuff I kind of understand.
I would say, to your listeners who may have heard this and have their interest piqued, it's fascinating. I'd recommend learning about it. You do want to be wary. So it's a little bit like kind of the late stages of the tech boom in the sense that there are a lot of scams. There are a lot of absolutely horrible business ideas where people take a dating site and then add a cryptocurrency. Yeah. Very similar to adding .com to the name of any, okay, we're a pet food company. Let's add .com, so we're a $100 million company. So investing, you want to be very, very skeptical and cautious and not leap at every shiny thing because you will get burned by scam artists.
I was checking out your blog. What's the name of your blog again?
The cryptocurrencyinvestor.com.
Cryptocurrencyinvestor.com. All right, cool. I'll link that on this so people can check it out. I was reading some of it today. How often do you get on there and mess around?
So as you saw, there aren't that many entries. I've been kind of experimenting. I'm not sure the right avenue for kind of expounding on ideas. So I have a newsletter that I send to friends and family. I have the blog, which is a bit more academic. And then I'm on Twitter kind of all the time trading individual ideas. Okay. So I expect to update it at least once a month.
Okay, cool. Nice. Well, cool. I guess we'll end there. Mm-hmm. So thanks for explaining it to me. It's pretty impressive, your knowledge. You don't have any notes or anything with you. This is all in your head, so good job.
Thanks, Jay.
All right.